Good morning. This week I'm doing the Parsha video from Durban, and we have in Parsha Teitzei a continuation of a theme we've seen in the last couple of Parshas, and also that appears other places in the Torah, of the most severe consequences for Averos, which is the death penalty, which is given on a number of different occasions. In our Parsha, it's given to the Ben Sorer Moreh, the wayward and rebellious son, which we see as a person who's going to become an absolute menace to society. Also comes up a little bit later with adultery. We had it in last week's Parsha with idol worship. And the question is, why is this the punishment that the Torah gives? What does the Torah say about the death penalty? Why is that proposed? So there are a few approaches I'd like to discuss. The first one, on a basic level, what the Torah is telling you is that your life does not belong to you. It's not something that you own, it's not something that you have full rights over, and that's not something you can take for granted. It's an idea of trusteeship or custodianship. And Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch makes this point right in the book of Bereshit in Parshat Noach, when Hashem is speaking to Noach and his children, and he tells them that I've given you dominion over the entire world, and I'm giving you permission to eat animals, but I'm not giving you permission to take another human life. And the word that he uses, he says, Ach damchem lenafshotechem edrosh. Your blood for your lives I will seek, edrosh. And Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch points out that this word doresh means to claim what is yours, to seek and claim what is yours. He says that's the word we find, for example, when we're talking about lost property. That if you find something belongs to somebody else, so you take it and you keep it, ad doresh achicha, until your brother seeks out. But again, the context there is until he seeks out what is his. So that's what he says Hashem is saying to us as well, that your lives for your souls I will seek out, because those lives ultimately do not belong to you, they belong to me. I am entrusting you with them, but that comes with a certain responsibility. And if that mandate is betrayed in the most fundamental way, as it is with the sins for which the death penalty is given, let's say idol worship, sexual immorality, murder, various other related indiscretions, that Hashem says, well, then you have forfeited the right to this gift with which I have entrusted you, and that's the one level of understanding it. Another explanation is found in the letters of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and it's a fascinating one because this was one that he wrote to Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan was president of the United States, he wrote to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein asking him, what does the Torah say about the death penalty? And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein wrote back about a page letter where he says, firstly, thank you so much for asking me, and I'm very grateful that you feel it's appropriate to ask the Torah's opinion, and that you ask from me as a representative of Torah. But he says that really the Torah's view on the death penalty is that it is something that is so difficult to practically apply. There are many, many safeguards to prevent the death penalty actually being given in practice. So, for example, it can only happen when there's a happen when there's a Sanhedrin, and it can only happen when you have two witnesses who are the whole long list of requirements as to what makes them kosher witnesses. The two witnesses, and they warned the person before, and they saw him doing it. And then he says you have rows of people who are there to challenge the Sanhedrin for if they would find the guy guilty inappropriately, but they don't speak they speak in the guy's defense, but they don't speak. And there's a whole long list of things. And he says the way in which it's structured makes it almost impossible to ever practically give the death penalty. So what you end up with, says Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, is a death penalty in theory, but not in practice. Now, what is the purpose of having a law that applies only in theory but not in practice? You could say maybe it's a deterrent, but the truth is it's not a deterrent. Because if you wanted a deterrent, then you better put it in practice. The fact that it's not actually being done means that it's known that this is not serious. People aren't, unless you have the two witnesses and the warning, it's not going to happen. So you can't even really say that it's a deterrent. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says, no, what it is it is an educational tool. The point of the death penalty is that he says, from the earliest age, every Jewish child learns there are some things that are so serious, that are so severe, that by committing these things, you actually forfeit your right to life. So, for example, when it comes to murder is something that is so serious, life is so valuable, that if you would take another person's life, you yourself should be put to death. Now, it may be that the death penalty is not given. It probably is that the death penalty will not be given. But the fact that you learn that from the very beginning, he says, inculcates a sensitivity towards the seriousness, towards the severity of these things. We understand that there are, or at least should be, very serious consequences to them. And so the idea is, we don't want to, we don't want to go out there and kill people. He says, the goal of the death penalty is not to wipe out the evil from society. He says that's really Hashem's job. As we find in the Gemara, that the owner of the vineyard will come and pluck the thorns from the vineyard. That's not the goal of the death penalty. Certainly, we have certain social justice goals, but the point of the death penalty, he says, is to inculcate people with the idea of how very important and severe these averot are. Idol worship, adultery, all of these things, which people can view as perhaps not so serious, as well, it's just one of those things. Now he says, you grow up learning that this is so serious. And so these are the two perspectives on the death penalty that I'd like to share, something that we find often quite difficult today. But if you look at it through the lens of these two things, the one being the message that your life is not your own, then it's not just about these severe sins that your life is not your own, it's about everything. Your money is not your own. Your life, your time, your energy, your abilities. All of these things are things that have been entrusted to you as a sacred task, and that you have a sacred responsibility to use them in accordance with your trusteeship. And the second idea, that we have to realize the huge consequences of our actions and how serious and severe certain things are, and not to gloss over them and not to undermine the significance and importance, but to realize this is how important it is. And even if we never see those consequences, we know within ourselves what they are and what they should be, and that should, please God, shape our behavior going forward to behave with goodness and responsibility. Shabbat Shalom.